Welcome to BDD.
Exactly shaking.
All right. So I'm going to move quickly through this, but at the same time, it's important. I'm going to have to give you some background on BDD. BDD means behavioral-driven development, and the core concept here is that we want to effectively create use cases. So the idea here is that we have use cases that describe the behavior of the system. The BDD infrastructure tested. I actually have a blog post about this that I put up recently. Yay, cookies.
You will now be placed into the conference.
You're welcome to read more about BDD and why we did it, and also why we didn't use Cucumber, which is the dominant BDD platform out there. I've used Cucumber. I like Cucumber, but it is very slow. And so even before we started Crowbar, I was working on this project to create a faster BDD infrastructure as part of a DevOps component to it. So it's not just about Crowbar, it's actually about DevOps and being able to gate deployments based on behaviors and verifying behaviors, and being able to do that in a parallelized, fast way is part of the objective for the framework. That's the introduction. So there is a
What's the link again?
No worries. It's join.me/DellCrowbar.
Join.me/DellCrowbar all one line. Then slash. DellCrowbar.
And so one of testing is one of my mantras. The other one that is part of my mantras is docs and code together. And you will note that in the docs section for the Crowbar bar clamp, there is a BDD section. One of the things that we've been doing is using this markdown aggregation system for our docs. You can actually edit it right here and make corrections to it, which is very cool. But I've made an effort to try and describe how BDD works and give people the references for using it. And we will walk through these steps on doing it. And I'll actually, we'll write some tests, we'll write some code, we'll see how all those pieces flow together and make it work. But there are docs, and I would encourage people to contribute to the docs. There's a fair bit in here about how it works. So let me give you a quick tour, starting at what the tests look like for BDD. So here's the objective. We will pick. Navigation's good. So if you were to look at this is a BDD test. Right here, all the BDD tests are called features. It goes along with the concept that we're testing use cases, and so they all follow the same pattern. Remember, the most important thing here is to say is that we're trying to create a BDD is supposed to be an English-like DSL, domain-specific language, which makes it easy for everybody, including product management, customers, right, community, to consolidate. So ideally, you could get somebody on the list to come back and say, when I do this, then I should see that, given this scenario, and that language translates directly into BDD. And so we'd like to use the BDD DSL to become sort of a schema for how we describe behaviors that we want to accomplish. Even to the extent where we should be writing these tests before they're written, before the code is written. So this feature page shows the basics of what a feature is. Before I go any further, I actually want to see if I'm recording. Supposedly, okay. Yes. Audio is not recording there, but this should be okay. Can people, is anybody on the phone that can hear me? Can confirm that we're...
Yeah, it's good. I'm dialed in.
Awesome. That means I'm recording. So I did a 2-hour session before, and then we lost the audio. And that's less than exciting. So here's the deal. Every feature is going to have some description that gives you a basis of what we're trying to accomplish. And then within the feature, it breaks down into a set of scenarios. Each scenario ends up with a name, which is how these work. And then they follow this basic pattern. I'll start with the nodes nav in this case. So here we have a scenario where we're navigating the nodes. And we're saying, given I am on the home page, which would translate to navigating to the home page, when I click on the nodes menu item, let me actually run. I'm going to stop for a second and actually crank up a what I'm doing right now is I'm running I'm just using my unit test environment as my target. All right, it's going to take a minute. I'm going to let this get started, and then I'll be. Oh, that's right. So I'm just going through the process of building a test environment on my dev system, and then I'll run a web server from that. So the idea here is that I would be able to go to my home page. I would click on the nodes menu item, right? Very straightforward language. The word nodes could be separate. It's in quotes because it could be substituted for any menu item that I have. And then I should see a menu item for dashboard. I should see a menu item for bulk edit. I have to escape out the ampersand, which is pretty normal. And I should see, so there's some text and things like that that I should see. And if you look at this is a UI testing scenario or feature. And so everything that this is doing is it's going through and clicking on all the menu items and making sure that I render the screens I'm supposed to see. We've been getting pretty sophisticated in that we've actually hooked in the localization files into BDD. So I can check not only that I see the menu items I want to see, instead of hard coding in that I'm seeing these words, I could say, well, you really should see this entry from the localization file, and it looks it up and will render that for you. So this example shows that it's doing exactly that.
Sorry, does it actually run the browser or does it run headless?
It runs headless using Erlang's HTTP client.
Okay.
So it's a decent. So you can't do Ajax with it. You can't do JavaScript, but you can get calls and return calls. So this is the basics of the language. Now we've extended the language a bit in the process here, and there's every one of those individual lines is called steps, and there's two things I need to explain. It's not in this file. So the main thing to understand in the DSL is the DSL uses the words when, the given, when, and then to walk through the stages of your test, right? So given is a preset. All the givens are run. There is no guarantee that givens run in order. Just that all the givens will run before the whens, all the whens before the thens, and that outputs from the when steps are passed to the then. So it's a sequential run based on a given set of givens to set up your test, when for your actions, then for your verification. We've extended this language from those things, and is just a way to repeat the step before. It's just more natural languagey. There's a couple of extensions for this that are very helpful. The word skip allows you to take a test that you don't want to run, put some comment in about why you don't want it to run, and this will show up. It'll actually show that I've skipped this test. And we don't count those as passed or failed. We actually count passed, skipped, and failed as 3 distinct categories of tests. There's an older way to skip tests, but this one allows us to put comments in, and that's what I recommend. The other words that we have are while and unless. I'll show you examples of while and unless. Crowbar CLI is a really good example for this. So the Crowbar CLI is a Linux command line interface. Therefore, it does not work in Windows. So the system has a keyword in it where you can say, unless I'm Windows, run this test. So it is perfectly reasonable to add in an unless statement. And we have a couple of different environment variables. You can also do a when, I'm sorry, not a when, but a while environment variable. So there's some things that only work if the system's already running, if it's live, and it has real nodes and stuff like that, or won't run if it's, so we have the words like interactive, dev tool. So inside of BDD, now I'm jumping way down in the weeds, but just bear with me. There is a configuration file. In that configuration file, you provide the URL, the username, the domain that you're logging into. Some basics in here like which titles you want to show with your output so you can make your output less verbose. Your logging level is settable in here. There is a documentation that has a table of all these settings in it. In here. Config list, it tells you what the configurations are. If I miss something, you please add it. So in here, you actually can set what these files are. The word environment here is what determines your when, your unless, and whiles. So you can say while I am in the dev.
You are the last party in the conference.
So what's going to happen is that environment variable lets you make different tests. So if you look through, we actually have several different configuration files already. There should be one for dev tool, dev config. Oh, sorry, this runs the simulator, which is beyond the scope for today. There's a dev tool config that I can run, and dev tool config is the one that is run by the dev tool for unit tests, and it includes
you will now be placed into the conference.
And what happens here is that it actually turns off a whole bunch of headers, and then we can do while dev tool environment and things like that. So there's a lot of subtlety we've built into the system over time to make it work both as a production test environment, a unit test environment, and a system test environment.
So the environment keyword here, dev tool. Is dev tool anything to do with there being a dev tool configuration?
Yeah, no, that's just convention. Okay. That is. So the dev tool, when it runs BDD, specifies to use the dev tool configuration. By default, dev tool will use the default configuration. To keep people from checking in their default configurations, because it's useful to create a custom one, there is only a default.example that you need to rename to be your default config. Okay? And that would let you put in a production password or put in something that I don't want us to check in passwords except the dev password, which is why we don't do that. So Git will ignore the default.config file. This is my default.config file where I add pieces and parts that I do. Right? And so that makes sense.
So somewhere, I guess, there is a full list of all of the different environments which you support, and the full list of all of the headings, whatever other setups we can do.
All in the docs.
All in there. Okay.
Except for the stuff that's not. But I work pretty hard to walk the walk when it comes to, if I add a feature to BDD, I write documentation to support it, and the check-ins come together. So, right, it doesn't make sense to me to promote test-first design and not show off all the aspects of it, which include docs, doc and test. Not perfect, but I try. So, okay. So that's overall, the very general. Oh, there's one more thing I haven't shown, which is this concept of finally. So, like any good test, right? There's an expectation that BDD will run against a live system. It is not a unit test environment where we run everything in a transaction on a throwaway database. This is designed to be run against production systems, and therefore you must be able to do setups, teardowns, and cleanups per step, and that's expected. That's exactly what this will do. So finally, it's for cleanup. You'll note in this example, there's these curly brackets. You'll see that with the applies also. There is this concept of some special words like object, which converts you to an Erlang object, and that's useful in steps. So there's a handful of these apply or BDD or integer or object, stuff like that, that actually converts you into doing this.
And what is the all caps rest?
That all caps rest is it identifies part of the steps. So I'll explain how steps work, because the core, this is something very Cucumber-esque, and it's important to understand how we determine what these words actually mean, what the programming is behind this natural language. Before I do that, I'm actually gonna run.
Is it worth like reading through Cucumber docs and finding with that, or will
It'll just confuse you. Okay. At this point.
This is Cucumber on steroids.
Yeah. Well, Cucumber's come a long way, and while I'm waiting for this to build, I really like Cucumber, but what I found was that besides being slow, it had me reach into the Rails infrastructure all the time and set up things and do stuff. BDD has no shortcut. If you can't do it in the UI or the CLI or the API, you're not accessing it. So it helps ensure that the uses that we're testing are actually exposed in the product. And so sometimes that forces us to maybe expose something that we might not expose, but for the most part, I've found it's very natural for what we're trying to do. All right, so let me go to the. All right. I might have a web server running. I do. That's what's going on. That won't work. I don't. Why is my web server not running? Ah. Oh, it's hard to do it under pressure.
We're not on.
It's not that I have.
One word. That is one word.
What?
That's one word. That is one word.
Oh, but it's not. That's not the problem. The problem is that bundler is not actually loading. This is a bundler thing, so I'm not. It's cool. We'll get this. We got it going. Oh, lovely. Coveralls is now a requirement, and I don't have it in the system yet.
full length build cache?
And so I will pull the latest build cache. Please pause while I pull the latest build cache. At least I'm in building. My build cache is local, so it can be shared among all my dev environments. And wait for that to do it. Build environment. The build cache is big. I pulled it last night. I got the new Crowbar stuff.
Morning, I had it enough of the gym.
I didn't. So I'm getting the fun of that experience. All right, now it's going faster. So I need to unwind back to the question. So steps. So every one of these DSL commands is a step, right? Those steps are pattern matched, right? I don't use regex like cucumber. I use Erlang's pattern matching, which is awesome. And so every step translates back into an Erlang routine called step, where it does it breaks down that step in a regular way, and then it looks that up in a cascading set of files. So what happens is that it'll actually go through, break that step file into its components. It'll delimit it based on the quotes or the curly brackets, and then it will go trying to run the step within the code files. First, it looks for an Erlang file with the same name as the feature. If it finds the step there, it will run it. After that, it falls back through a sequence, this one, secondary step files, and it will go through this file in order. So when you write a new step, the BDD system will go to the feature and look for the step. If it doesn't find it, it then goes to Crowbar REST. In this case, it's configurable. Crowbar REST, Crowbar, BDD WebRat, BDD RESTRat, BDD ClyRat, BDD Catchall. You can add or remove things from this list, but it's precedence. So if I create two steps with the same name, that's okay. It'll just find the one by precedence first. And so there's actually a pattern when you write new steps, and BDD will guide you, tell you when you need to. When you write new steps, you put them in your feature file first, and then you move them up to the application, Crowbar REST or Crowbar files, and then if they're really generic, then you move them into the BDD level one. So you actually want to move your files. You want your steps to be as generic as possible, but you're going to transition them through so they get tested effectively first. The convention of calling things WebRat or RESTRat is ClyRat is a cucumberism that I inherited. It's probably besides using the language, it's a big nod to Cucumber, based on the web engine they use called Capybara, which is rat. Enough history. So we should be good. Lord. Capybara fan. The very thing for it. Yeah. I think what I might do is just do this with the update gem cache, and then I'll fix my whole. I might know. I can be sorry. I just love having to do stuff like this. All right. I'll just whack all the gems.
Dash update gem cache, that will take longer than pulling out the gems from the cache.
All right.
I haven't made any ever bugs over to parallelize it. So it looks at each gem one at a time.
All right. Can I reset harder? They're forced. Can I do like a reset, Victor? What do I want to do to just whack the files in my current? Oh, I can stash. Cool. Interesting. Okay. That was not a lot of change.
The other thing I usually use for that is when I don't care about what the changes is You said dash hard origin slash raster.
Okay. Thank you. That's awesome. So in addition to the BDD overview, you're getting a how do you debug and test the dev environment. So, but basically what I'm doing, we've gotten pretty practiced at doing is using our unit test environment, our test infrastructure that the dev tool builds in order to create a running web server or test environment that I can then edit my code in Git, and then I can test it and keep it running really fast. In the background here, we're waiting. I run an rsync. This actually will sync between my where I'm working in my bar clamps and the test environment, and so it keeps everything. It doesn't help me for running the tests. I actually have to let the tests resync as a bundler. But for when I'm running a web server or I'm in Rails C or something like that, this rsync process will will automatically update. I'll be all good. So you'll get to see how this goes.
BDD environment only comes with the dev build, not the production build.
No, that's not right.
You run all the and then you can actually hit it on the instruction mode. We thought about adapting BDD to work in instruction mode, but we can use it as a self-test once we have it.
Right. I was thinking that actually could be a very useful automator.
It's one of the many, many good ideas that we
we'll never have time to do.
Yeah. You ran instead of unit tests while in that directory, you need the CD out of it and then back.
I didn't, but let's just since everything is foobar, let's just start there. Sorry? You can do it.
Invoke a shell script.
I do. That's what I'll show you that. Hold on a second.
You can do now.
Yeah, so, and it doesn't have to run local. This is a couple of important points. BDD is a web tool, or it uses the web client, but it also does command lines. So specifically, the one I'm showing you, and the reason for this training is so that we can do exactly this. It can run remote, right? And it's completely independent of our Rails infrastructure. So there is no taint between, it never goes to Rails and does stuff to set up a test. Set it up in BDD. And so an example of, here's the users. One of the tests I was going to add but haven't yet is to actually create a full loop test. I have some that do this. But this actually calls out to the Crowbar CLI, executes a command, and then runs it. And so what you could do with this test is you can run the CLI command, then you can go to the web and actually validate that the web did its thing. I have a test I did on deployments. Let me show you the deployment features. So there's a deployment feature over here. Yep, here the deployment shows up on the list. So I have a deployment, given I have a bar clamp, so I can actually check that I have a bar clamp. As I propose this deployment list on this bar clamp, then REST gets the test object from the list, and then it says and. Let's see, where's the one? Yeah. So in this case, I'm actually doing an API call, and then I validate up here the UI one. So I do the test to create the bar clamp, and then I actually see it on the UI without translation errors. So in this case, I'm doing one API injection, UI validation.
That's all working within the Crowbar environment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now what I'm saying, can I do a call out to a random shell script?
Totally. You could. Very easily. And I'll explain how that's
At what point did you do call it as one of your steps or what?
Yeah, well, spectacle in fault injection. Okay. So if I want to create a difference in the environment, yeah, so I can run the while, I can just loop round and then just change something in the environment and check that it happens and it gets picked up.
Yeah, you could do that. That's very, very, very practical. So the way this works is that, let me show you what a step file looks like. So here's the deployment. We can use deployment. So I'm going to jump past this and look at steps. The way, and steps have a standard component to them. This is not the best example of a step file. Let me show you. Of course, this is better. So, for example, here's one that checks I-18N. So all the steps start with step. The way Erlang works is that it does pattern matching. So it's highly efficient at finding in all these thousands of steps that we now have, of finding the exact one I'm looking for. So they're all called the same thing. They all get a config. They all get a hash of data. So depending on where you are in the process, if I'm a then step, I get the results from the when steps. If I'm a when, I get the results from the given. I tell it what type of step I have. I know I actually get passed in the scenario and the ID number, so you actually can store data within a test. That's a feature we added. There are times when in the given, I create an object, I want to know the ID for that object, so I can validate that it came out. There's a way to do that. It's part of the infrastructure. It's very handy. And then you actually have the text. This is the text of the step. So there is a test. Then I should see something in the body of the HTML body. The word text is substituted by what's in quotes. And that's how it matches it. And then you create all these different key. Given this will say then I have a then key ID should match this atom from setup. You have lots and lots of these. There are I already told you whens, thens, givens, finallys, unless, whiles, and skip. There is also a setup and teardown. So every feature file automatically will run a setup if there's one in there, and automatically run a teardown if there's one given. And then the test infrastructure as a whole will run a setup and teardown. So the setup and teardown I have on screen is run before every test sequence is run.
Do we have conditionals in there for teardowns?
Not specifically.
I'm thinking that some failure conditions are going to require a much more emphatic reset of the environment.
Because there is something called the inspector, and the inspector will tell you if you're leaving garbage in the environment. But that type of hardening sounds like something really interesting to make sure that there's adequate cleanups for that.
I'm sorry, go ahead. There's no per scenario setup. So there's setup and tear down at the feature level and globally, but on each scenario you can do a scenario a by scenario setup and tear down.
The givens are the setup.
Okay, got it.
And the finallys are the teardown. Okay. So yes, you do. And so that's given is setup, finally is teardown. And the reason it's not called setup and teardown is because that breaks the DSL. Cool.
Okay.
So right at the end of the day, we really want somebody to say, hey, given this scenario, when I do this, then I see this result. That it's so straightforward. Hey, my website's working now. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with it. And 192. Welcome to the Crowbar website. Now, one of the things I like about this whole environment is I get to watch my hits on this side over here, and I'm logged in. And there's something going on with the network. Those are both from the network partner. So, not a big deal. They will get addressed, I'm certain.
It's probably something that I banged in to make it stop dying during the actual install process.
We had a flurry of polls in the last 24 hours that was truly spectacular. All right, so this is the basics for this. I BDD a lot of different ways. And so in this case, I have actually a BDD client running on my Windows system that hits the websites for this server. Okay. You can run it on the Crowbar server itself, against itself. There's a default file for that. It runs localhost. You can run the DevTool version. I'll show you a couple different ways to do it. In this case, I actually have, this is running against my code base, which is on a VM that's shared by an FS mount to my Windows system. I have my feet in a lot of different camps. So the way BDD works is you can run a BDD test. Actually, I'll start with this. You can get a list of features. So everything that BDD runs is going to start with BDD : that's Erlang. In the Erlang shell, with the directory correct, in the right sense, and then I can ask it for which features I've got. There's also a BDD steps. These are documented. It'll actually parse all the files. This could use some love, but as a basics, it'll actually produce I'm trying to create a markdown document that shows you all of the steps that are defined so that you can go look them up, figure them out, tell you what file they're in. The basic way it runs is, I'm going to start at the feature level instead of the test level. So I can say feature, and then the name of my feature, actually, the name of my configuration file, default, and then the name of my feature file, dashboard, period. And then what's happening is I just ran the system. It did my basic stuff. You can see it run the web server in the background, and if you were really watching, you would notice that it created nodes in the background over here. Those nodes should go away, so they should be deleted at the end. They should be picked up as part of the cleanup steps. But it could be that that's broken. So that's the basic. I just ran a BDD test, right? BDD feature. I could run node. In this case, it's going through and doing all the node stuff. There's a BDD. This should fail. Sorry, scaffolds. Scaffolds is slow. I keep thinking I'm going to make it optional, but it's useful because it actually tests the whole object model. It's literally going through every scaffold and checking to see that every scaffold in the system works. It happens to be my slowest test because scaffolds are really slow. So it's literally going through and building up my scaffolds.
Is scaffolds an opportunity to parallelize?
It is. It just hasn't caused me enough pain to do that. I would actually consider making it, I'm thinking of putting an unless environment in here and not testing it every time would be my first, like in default, it would skip it because I don't want people checking in code if scaffolds don't pass, but I don't want them getting tired of waiting. But literally, it goes to the URL and it asks for the name of the scaffold. All right, so all this is well good. It's going through and doing that. So BDD feature runs a feature. If you want to test the whole darn thing, you say BDD : test. Provide your configuration file, which if you have a default one set, you don't need, and you can just test it. And it'll run through all of the available BDD tests. Erlang, the language is compiled, so the step files you have to compile, but the feature files are interpreted. So if you add a new feature, you can just run it. There's no recompiling necessary. And I will show you how to do the recompilation process as we go through this. You'll notice that every step here is including this number. Every step has a hash, and the way this works, let me do a fast test. Here's feature nodes. So I can go in here and I can say BDD, and if I want to just look at one, I can do debug. I can spell debug, right? Specify the name of my configuration file, which is default, so I can skip that. I want to test the node file, and I want to test node list. So if I do that, and give it the hash, it runs that one test. It does all the setup, all the teardown. It runs that one test, and it turns the debugging level to debug, which then shows me a lot more information about what's going on in the system. When we started this, we didn't have this feature. This has been a significant thing, right? Debug, if you have a test that's failing and you hit debug, you will almost always find out what the problem is because our logging has gotten much more sophisticated. And if nothing else, this will save your bacon. Now you can also go back and up the logging level to trace, at which point it's going to dump tons of stuff. The challenge with trace is you also get the setups, and so we have some things where we actually should have a level even deeper than trace, which I've been starting to implement, but hasn't been as much of a worry. And you could also go the other direction. So instead of trace, you could go debug info, and it's going to set the level to info, and you'll get the normal info level stuff. Okay. And you can override the log level by saying BDD log debug, and then it'll run everything in debug log level. Once again, these are documented, so I'm cruising really fast, but the main things to remember are test runs all the tests, feature runs the feature, debug runs a scenario. Okay. And that will help you quite a bit.
Debug runs a scenario.
Debug is a scenario.
Debug took over that. Okay. There was no, I had one for scenario, I think it's still there, but there was no reason to run it if you could do debug info and get the same effect. So that's the basic running of BDD. You can point it from different places. If I took this guy over here, I can go into my code, archives. I can go into the BDD framework. I can compile. I need to. The first thing that you're going to need to do, I've already done this, is do a compile. The BDD Linux compile will compile all the Erlang code into compiled Erlang. So if you don't have that, compile it, it will run.
You don't want it to be Linux installed unless you've already put Erlang in the box, right?
No, it's included. It's included. If you followed our dev steps, it's included because you have to have Erlang to run.
So when you did dev setup, it ran.
Correct. What Linux install does is it actually it just collects, compile, and then it runs install and stuff like that. It's actually used by DevTool. So if I go into Erlang here, the same shell, and I say BDD feature node here, it's running the same test. The difference would be for this guy, since he's local, I could actually say BDD. What do I have? I think I have a local. Actually, Crowbar config goes to localhost, so I could go BDD Crowbar node like that. In this case, I just did the exact same test, but now I ran it from my localhost URL instead of the actual published IP address for this machine.
If you're not running DevTool?
If you're not running DevTool, you can hit any of them. So if I have a Crowbar server running, I can, which is the way I usually do development, is I actually develop against a live dev server. You just put in the IP address of that and run it. You don't have to be in dev mode. The tests assume dev mode to an extent, and we need to tweak that if you want to run against production mode. To run in dev mode for a Crowbar server, there is a script called dev mode, and it basically turns off the server in production mode, does on a regular server, it turns off the web server, it migrates the databases for development, and then it runs an interactive dev server. And that actually flips. There's things in Crowbar that are only available through dev mode, only visible in dev mode. So there are some behavioral changes. But there's nothing that would keep you from having steps that are sensitive to that. It should be pretty straightforward to do. The one other caveat that's worth noting in the features is any of these object features, the I18N things and stuff like that, those are not done at step execution time. They're done at when the steps are actually compiled. They're not compiled when they're interpreted the first time. Then we substitute in those objects and stuff like that. That is not done while the step's being processed. It's done as a pre-process step. The reason object is used here is that it's really handy in the step definitions, especially one of the step definitions I've spent the most time in of late is BDD RESTRAT, which handles REST, that's the airline compiled. In this one, there's a ton of capability around creating an object and things like that, and those things are done generically. And so by using the object name, BDD infrastructure under the covers goes and looks up the Erlang file that matches that object. So when I say, and this is why this is a really important note to understand with this, in this feature file, when I say object bar clamp here, this generic code, right, will fall through to BDD RESTRAT, and then RESTRAT says, oh, here's the bar clamp object. It goes and finds the bar clamp URL file. This is really critical things, something critical to understand. So my bar clamp URL file, and then these things that aren't steps, G, validate, JSON, inspector, are all things that the RESTRAT infrastructure and the BDD infrastructure uses to create generic behavior. So when I say object do something and it falls through RESTRAT, RESTRAT has certain assumptions about what it needs. So it needs this routine called G, which is the global lookup, and it will resolve the path of bar clamps. So since our REST API follows a very specific pattern, I can make a single call to say, get an object with this key, and as long as I tell it, it has a way to figure out which, the G file to find, it just goes, looks up G, gets the path, and then resolves the path with the key, pulls back the objects. The objects are all in a standard format, and it can actually store it. So we leverage some standard, by convention, methods in every one of the object map files for this. So for example, G provides global information, constant, and then it falls through to Crowbar lower. And then validate actually performs a RESTful validation of the object, or validation of the JSON object. So it will go through and check to see that the JSON matches the patterns we expect. And there's a routine in Utils. There's a ton of stuff in Utils where it'll actually go and say, okay, for the key jig order must be a number. Great. That makes perfect sense. And so it'll actually go and look in the JSON body, figure out that it's a number, and then figure it out. One of the things we wrote is a JSON parser. So it actually, it's pretty good. I can't call my baby ugly. So it's an adequate JSON, parser that converts JSON into Erlang hashes and lists, and it is really handy because JSON or Erlang loves lists, and if you comply with the lists, then you're happy. The ISO thing can actually do regexes. It can do lists. It does counting. It provides a whole bunch of capabilities. So if you look through, especially the newer, let's see, just is playing with snapshot. There's deployment. This one actually, it says, oh, this must be a database ID. It knows that it has to be length 10. There's one of them that actually validates that you're within a certain range. I mean, you can make the JSON validations very sophisticated. This is awesome because I will tell you, every time I tweak something in the API, I know that the contract for our APIs are validated. And last night, I actually added this committed snapshot ID thing. It barfed on this test. I had to add it, and now I know that we're actually enforcing that contract. That's the point. Crowbar REST validates the generic name, description, ID, and order, which most of our objects have. So I try to keep the code dry. So not that hard, Jason, and I like to keep the code dry. This one actually includes the pattern of having a create. So the infrastructure is smart enough to use this to create new objects. The inspector pattern is used for housekeeping. So the system will, before BDD runs, it will go through and call the inspector for every feature that it's going to run, keeps a list of what the inspectors return, runs all the tests, calls the inspector, the same routine at the end, compares the results and tells you if there's added stuff or removed stuff that you thought you were going to have. So the idea is we're running against a live system. I want to know that my test did or didn't add stuff, left artifacts around. So the inspector is a mechanism to do that. JSON is meant to build object JSON to press into the API. So you've got validate on one side and JSON on the other, and then you have your steps. You'll note in a lot of these steps there is a step in here that is sort of means like end of config or something like that. Just Erlang punctuation throws people off a little bit at first. There is a regular pattern to it. The last step in a file has to have a period after it if they're the same pattern. Last step in any pattern has to have a period. Last method in any pattern has to have a period. And so it's handy to keep this one at the end that has a period in it. Semicolons separate parallel sentences, commas separate sequential things. It's like Erlang tutorial.
API testing. And quite essential thing primarily for API testing. How do we set up to inject invalid values?
You would create a custom step to do that. Completely. Let me show you. We can actually walk through that as a scenario. I have a test. I have some features that I did not complete the tests for. Let me find one. So, like role type. Over here, I have a whole bunch of skips, right? So I've made the choice to skip this until I can get it working. This is actually role type. So this is part of the big rename. I did not add new tests for everything. So I want to check my role types list. So I'm going to turn off. I'm going to take off my skip. I have a role type list. So when REST gets the role type list, then there should be a value Crowbar. So there should be a Crowbar role type, and there should be a private. And this is the same as doing. Where's my web browser? Over here, I can go to Crowbar v2 role types. Oh, downloaded was. That's not what I expected.
The browser doesn't drop that content.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Yeah, because I made that change.
Yeah.
Cool. That's good. That actually means it's working. So, this is the JSON that's returned. Okay. And this conforms to the expected JSON result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this test. All I did was create the feature, right? Test-driven development. So now I can come over into my Erlang environment, and I can do a BDD, in our case, feature role type. Isn't it? So because I was conforming to known good REST stuff, and I've already built, let me show you what they're. So this is the cool thing. I'm doing very little work to create these tests, and that is the essence of a good framework for testing. Is that it doesn't take a lot of work. So what I did was I've already built the role type, the path. Right here's the path I need. I've already got to validate. It validates the model. I've got to create. It does the right thing for creating. I've got an inspector. I don't have any steps. I've got stubs, tear down some setups, and I've got a JSON method. So I actually went through when I created this to build that. So because I have that, I'm able to run the feature really easily, and this is why I have two windows open, so I can do this. Here's my feature over here. Good. And here is my role type code. So, and then the same, I should get the same type of behavior when I get the role type. This is a real basic test. When I get the role crowbar, role type, crowbar, and then the same thing. So when it gets the role type, I'm not doing an injection for this, but this is going to make sure that if I use role, the model is slightly different, so it would fail. And since I didn't change any code, I can just rerun this. And this is telling me, you'll notice, so now I got some failures, and it's saying, hey, I failed my properly formatted, and I failed my, I can't include all the extra syntax, so you get short messages, but I can easily take the failed crowbar role test like this. I can say BDD debug role type, get a whole bunch of information, and it's going to come through. And so what I've got here is I'll point out the syntax you need to understand. Here's the feature. So if you look at the debug output now, here's the test I just started. Tells you who I'm authenticating with. This is doing all the setup. It actually will tell you I ran the setup. Here's running global setup. There's a deprecation system, so when we slide things around, we'll get deprecation notices. They start off quiet and they get noisy based on dates. Then I actually start running the feature, so here's the feature. And these little upticks are going to tell you what step was run. So you can look through, I can't easily give you step and then the things that ran because of the way that parsing works. So the step is below the output for it. At the end of every feature, you're going to get this this open and close. So, or at the end of a feature. So feature, you're going to get these arrows telling you the feature opened and closed. And then in here, you're going to see here's the step I ran, and here's my failure report for that step. So I can actually look and say, okay, so my step then, the role is properly formatted. Here, failed. And it's actually giving me a warning. There's a missing step for the role type is properly formatted. That is probably not what we think it is. It's telling me that somewhere in the chain, it can't find one of the methods that it's looking for. And it assumes it's a step missing if that happens. And then before here's there should be a thing.
And your feature file is not enough for that. There should be it.
Oh, yep, that's the problem. Should be a value crowbar. And I can also say like this. These are defined, and there should not be a value private because I'm just getting the one object. And I actually have test. There's a whole bunch. And there should be a value private. Okay. So now if I run it again, I think what's happening is my value. So the difference here is the object role type is properly formatted. Is not engaging the routine. So I'm going to make sure my role type is compiled, which it might not have been, or it might not have been done right. Okay, so in this case, we're actually a little bit closer. It failed properly formatted, it passed, there should be a value. So it's clearly getting the thing back. But my properly formatted, so I'm going to pause and explain and show something that changed subtly between these two runs. In the last run, it was saying, hey, you're missing steps. In this run, it's telling me I'm failing steps. So what happened is when I compiled this thing, it actually was able to resolve the missing validate step. And in doing that, was able to actually fail. So now when I go back and debug, that missing validate step is going to give me a much more robust answer. So it's going to fail. This is the summary up here. And it still isn't happy. Let's see. There should be a crowbar value. So what's happening is I suspect role type here, and the role type object is properly formatted. So let's check that I'm calling that correctly. And I'm going to do that by looking at another feature file just to make sure.
Do you know if it's failing the then step or then or then?
It's failing the, how can I tell?
Yeah.
It tells me it is failing the, it only fails then, sorry. It can only fail then steps. Thens are tests. Whens are setups. Whens and givens are setups. So you only fail, you only get yes, no results on thens.
Okay. So if it fails, then it's then.
Right, it has to be. So, okay, so what, I just want to find the properly formatted. There we go. Then the object, just to make sure I'm, one of the biggest learning curves, one of the hardest things to do with this is just finding steps and not recreating steps. Let's see, then the object. Yeah, I'm calling it right. So what's happening is I'm looking for the role type being properly formatted. It's possible that my validate method is, let's see, let's validate, that looks all good. Oh, okay, so these guys.
It's not the double T. It's not the single and double T in the word formatted.
I'm sorry?
You spelled formatted.
The format just had two T's. This one has one.
You were right. Thank you. Let's see. Spelling, always get good points for spelling. Okay. That should be it. Let's see.
No, it's failing the private.
So yeah, these tests should fail in a more, yeah. All right. So this it didn't pass the is a end because the result was false. So now it's not finding. Now there's a whole bunch of warnings. Keys didn't find stuff, and the reason it's doing that is because this isn't using the wrapper. And like this is one of the challenges for this is going to be building up more and more docs to help people. But that's a universal truth. So this role type is not using the wrapper, so it's using the API, but it's not using the wrapper for the API. So there's actually, to make this work, I have to do this. So I have to actually translate the wrapper into JSON. So here we go. Okay. So I do actually test to see that the types are correct. Mm-hmm. So in this case, what I've done, I'll step back and explain this so that you can see how what the change I just made. So in the last week, 2 weeks, we have added. We're trying to get our REST syntax or JSON syntax correct. And so one of the things that Ward has been helping spearhead is creating packaging around the REST objects that are returned to make them more REST compliant rather than just returning raw JSON. The old stuff all returned raw JSON. This test was set up to just look at raw JSON effectively. I had to modify this test in order to remove the wrapper because the new tests are all expecting, when you get back JSON, it's actually wrapped JSON.
Either in a hash or in an array.
Right.
And so the JSON the object actually has is a one of several items in a top level JSON description. Top level, most of the top level, which is metadata about the outputs and the right.
And as of yesterday, we are now also versioning the response headers, so you can actually tell what version of the wrapper you're getting back, and BDD is
wrapper? Your version of the
version of the API for that bartender is
that exact response method, right? So there's a
well, no, it's immediate. Yeah, but I mean the BDD has version of yeah, and the URI is the version. Yeah.
clarity.
So a nice pattern would be converting the API and the bartender without crafting up the routes.
So there's a version that's not the API version of the bartender.
There's a return version. Hold on. I'm gonna pause this. And I'm gonna finish BDD. And then I'll put him on the hot seat when it comes to talking about that. So anyway, so I have to unwrap the JSON, pull out the data, which is what I actually want to test. I test that the wrapper is the right type. So this array that I check, assert that everything's true in it, is just a list of true, false values, and everything in here is actually a mini test. So is a test of an individual key. Type is a validated test. You could actually write pretty sophisticated tests inside of this validate. But it, like most then tests, returns true or something else. And it only passes if it's true. So now that I've updated the validator, I need to recompile. Record not, item not found. So this is telling me there's actually Erlang's very loose about a lot of things, and one of the things they did to make it a little bit tighter is they allow you to specify records, even though they're really just hashes, tuples really. But so once I added that missing definition, so this syntax here with the wrappers use Erlang records because it's much easier to maintain the code.
Is that what
That's what that is. It's a hash. So the wrapper is the variable. It's a hash. The record type.
So small.
Sorry, the record type, and then the key, the actual individual property of the record. And I've been trying to switch to use that because it's so much more maintainable. Not as fast, but it's maintainable. So anyway, now that I've done that, if I now run this feature again, it's telling me, hey, you didn't get back this value private, and the formatting is not right, which doesn't surprise me because I haven't actually looked at what the format should be. Right. So, I don't want to go any further troubleshooting this. My goal for this was to take you down a path of here's the RESTful objects. You can look at the other RESTful objects. There's REST for create, delete, validate that it's there, get a list. There's basically all of the normal REST actions. Once you write the validate, the G path, right, JSON, once you sort of create these, and there's actually, this is in the docs, what these are. Once you create those, any new model that you add can be tested using BDD RESTRAT with standard syntax. So I can write the basic contract validation for our API with a relatively minimal set of code and change, and it's very well, it's very patterned. Okay. And that following these patterns is hugely beneficial because that lets us do things like use the simulator, which I'll show in just a second as a bonus in the last.
Well, and that brings me to the question that kind of told you. So this is all great for testing, sort of you've got code and you want to test it. So if you were using this in a true sort of BDD fashion where I'm going to write these tests first, then I do all this stuff ahead of time.
Then you do it in this pattern. So I would say scenario, let's see, we'll just invent one, but we'll say the foo role type has order 600. Okay. So in this case, I would want to say when REST gets the object role type. I don't have to write this is standard. There's no interesting logic here. But I say foo Then I want to bar in the green, right? And so the bar is going to be generic, and then green is specific, green type. So when I do that, what I've done is I'll show you exactly what this translates into. So the first line, that's going to fall through to Crowbar REST. That should be perfectly good. The second one is not. It's different. So what will happen is I don't have to compile to do this. I just have to run the feature. Not that feature. This feature. So in this case, I get the normal failures, but this one says, hey, wait a second. I don't know what that step is. And so it warns me that I need to add this missing step. So in a true BDD environment, what I would do is I'd write a test. It describes the behavior I expect. It would fail. BDD is going to actually say, hey, if you want this to work, you need to find that test. There is a source of frustration for people who use this tool. It's gotten a lot better, but it's still, you will still encounter this. If the Erlang is loosely coupled together, and there are times when it goes to look for, so like you put a typo in and it's looking for a method and it can't find it, it can't distinguish between that and the test not being present. So you will get this warning if you have a test with an error in it, and that error means that you typoed a method name and it can't resolve the method name. Okay. Cool thing about Erlang is you can actually operate way down low and you can actually invoke steps completely standalone, which is sort of fun. You can invoke a step, just the step. There's ways to do that. That's an advanced thing.
Okay, so I'm not understanding what you mean about the typo part.
So what would happen is, I'll demonstrate.
No, just,
No, let me,
I couldn't hear you very well.
okay.
Because you're talking so fast.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to cram everything in.
I know.
So here's the deal. I'll demonstrate exactly how this works. So I want to have this, I'll just call it name. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking this, step exactly the way it was recommended, with the substitution of, if I could have left foo in, it would resolve it, but I want name to be generic. Okay. So I'm just taking this step, no other changes. This is actually what I'd recommend is the process. I compile it. It gives me a warning that the word name is not used. Right, it's just a warning. When I run the feature now, what happens is I get, instead of getting warned that I'm missing the step, I actually have a foo role type. It fails that step. Okay. And now,
Do you think that's a problem?
it's not. It's a step in the development. So now what I've got is I don't have a missing step. I have a failing step.
So now you have to write the code, which enables expansion.
Correct.
And that's what you meant by.
No. Let me show you. Now let me show you the error that I make all the time, and you will also make, because it is what people do. So in BDD utils, there is this awesome utility called log, and you can specify the log level, like debug. Debug is really handy. If you use the word puts, I'm a Railsy guy, it will always show puts. Okay, puts shows up, and don't leave them in, but they're really handy if you're debugging. So I can say puts, and there's a whole bunch of options for log. The one I prefer the most right now is to be able to specify the name of the name of the feature, the thing I'm calling, and then what I want to do is give my information. This is a sample, and then I have to put the name I want. Sorry, I'm not trying to teach how Erlang does formatting, but it follows it, comma, and then. So what I'm going to do, Wayne, is I'm going to mistype the word log. Okay. So okay, yeah. So watch now. When I do that and compile it, Erlang has no check, no linker like that. There is something, we're not using it. But so now when I run the feature, it mistakenly tells me that I am missing this step. I'm not missing the step. I know I'm not missing the step. What happened is that when it couldn't resolve, the error that bubbles up through the system is exactly the same error as if the step wasn't there. And so we could make it smarter, but people spend a lot of time, new BDD developers spend a lot of time.
I've seen at the bottom match.
Correct. It's team collaborating, right? So people, you could spend a lot of time. I just saved everybody listening to this call an hour.
You presume.
So in this case, yeah, in this case, what happens is props it. What happens here is that you've got this failed role type. Not too long. Oh, here it is. Sorry. And here's the puts. Role type is sample bar and actually exposes that test. The test is still failing because it still returns false. If I want the test to pass, I just have to return true. And so, okay, so what I can actually do is I can say name equals true, like that. And then in this case, I have to compile. So remember, I put bar in. If I switch this now, say foo. I don't have to recompile since it's the teacher. I passed it. So, I know I've been rushing through this. Hopefully the recording will make it easier to go back. But the goal here is that, in this hour and a half, we have gone through how to use the BDD, showed you how features work. We've actually extended tests. We've written tests. We've made stuff happen. I have not tried to teach you Erlang. We're not using very complicated Erlang, but Erlang itself is its own thing. And so not everybody enjoys it the way I enjoy it, but a lot of what you should be able to do at this point is look at Erlang steps that we've got and at least be able to read what they do.
And you have a method that will show what steps are available, right?
I do. BDD steps will show you that. And so
you can peruse those and see if there's something that matches what you want.
Right. And so the contract with this sort of works like this. It is, I have an expectation that everybody on the team should write features and write a scenario and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And not everybody will end up writing steps. The more people who can do it, the better. But if you should be able to use the steps we've got. This is how sort of how Cucumber works. And then we're going to end up adding new steps to accommodate different scenarios and things like that. So the expectation is that even if you're not comfortable writing in Erlang, that you could write the features, the behaviors that you want, and then hand off to somebody or collaborate with somebody to help actually write the steps and make those reusable. I can tell you.
So Rob, for example, if I wanted, if I was demanding a RESTful interface to our jobs system, I could write out all the BDD to say, when I do this, I should get this. When I do that, I should get that. And then give it to someone else to say, we need to be able to monitor our jobs for Jade.
Correct. And the awesome part of that is, even if they don't implement it or don't agree with your request, the language that you're using to express the request is now so clear and reusable that we now actually have documentation. So you could go to the BDD infrastructure feature list here and say, for the bar clamp UI, I now have an expectation that when I go to the basic screen, I see these things on the screen. And you could actually go in and do that. And for a test, especially like a UI test, you could actually edit it here and add it into the infrastructure and commit it. And those things make perfect sense. So when we get bugs, one of the things I'd love to see us do, especially if it's a UI bug or something like that, is the bug comes in as a scenario. And we drop it in BDD, and it's like, this is failing. It should pass. And then that gets added to the testing infrastructure, and we never fail that again because it's tested. Right? And so we have the capability to do this now.
Problem with that, and I agree, don't get me wrong. The problem is that we need those call-outs for specific setups, environmental setups, to cause that to happen.
One of the things that you will be happy to see, I'm glad you brought that up, is in the configuration files, the configuration file actually lets you choose which global setup you run. So you could build an Erlang file that did global setup for you, or QA, or this environment or that environment, and have it be its own global setup just for that configuration.
We're going to need a number of those in a second. I suspect we'll need the problem of subplatforms so that we can pull out a specific one because we'll get customer reported errors, and then we have to understand their environment, understand their workflow, and set it up to reproduce that. Well, that's going to be interesting.
Cool. So capabilities are, it's new.